Hey, this is Schuyler from themixingprocess.com, and today we're going to talk about mastering, which is the third primary part in the audio production process. The other two being recording and mixing, which we'll talk about in different videos. So I've actually learned that mastering is probably the most mysterious and misunderstood piece of the production process. And I think that's because if you really don't understand mixing, you're not going to understand mastering either, because they all kind of build on each other and they all use very similar techniques and tools to get the job done. So before I dive into what mastering is, let's go ahead and get a little short review on the recording and mixing process as well, because like I said, they all build on each other, and unless you understand the one before it, it's going to be really difficult to understand the one that comes after. So let's start with recording. So in the recording process, every input, every instrument is recorded to its own track. So if we've got a full band, every vocalist is going to get recorded to its own track. Every guitar, every drum head, every cymbal, everything is going to get recorded onto its own track. It's going to be its own input. Once all of those different things are recorded, it then moves on to the mixing process. And the mixing process is all about taking all of those individual inputs and mixing and blending them all together into one big mix. Make it sound like one cohesive song or piece of music. That's the mixing process. And there's a lot of different tools that we use in order to do that. But basically, we're taking all those inputs, mixing it all into one big project, and then at the end of that, we actually render all of those separate tracks down into one single stereo audio file. And this is the file that actually goes on to the mastering process. Now, the mastering process is very similar to the mixing process. The key difference is that you're not mixing all those individual tracks. You're actually just mixing one track. You're mixing that track that came from the mixing step. So what really is mastering? When we say that word, what are we talking about? What exactly goes into that process? Well, mastering is the process of, like I said, taking that final product from the mixing process and kind of working with it holistically. So think about it this way. If you've got the recording process is all of the individual inputs, every detail on the individual instrument or input list. Then when you get to the mixing process, you kind of zoom out a little bit. You're still working with the individual tracks, but you're kind of blending it all together. You've zoomed out and you're getting a bigger picture of what this whole process, or a bigger picture of what this whole end product is supposed to look like. Well, when we get to mastering, it's like we zoom out even further. We're actually not dealing with the specific individual tracks at all anymore. We've zoomed out so far now that we're dealing with the project or the song as a whole piece. So that's kind of the difference between mixing and mastering there. We've zoomed out a little bit and we're working as a whole on this project. So let's just kind of go through the different things that we would do in a mastering session. So the biggest thing is we're really just putting the finishing touches on the song as a whole. We're not as much dealing with specific issues on the individual track level, but we are dealing with specific issues of the project as a whole. So let's say I listen to a mix and the low end is just out of control. It's not tight, it's too loud. I can actually manipulate and change, even though I have one track with the whole song on it. I can actually go in and edit and mix the low end of that track as a whole. So I can kind of put the finishing touches on it. I can deal with some general, but yes, specific to some extent, problems of the project as a whole. But also think about this. what if I have not just one song, but what if I'm mastering an entire album? A big part of the mastering process when it comes to mixing albums is not just mixing the individual songs or tracks on each for the album, it's also making sure all of those tracks and songs fit and blend well together. So if you've ever listened to an album start to finish, you probably noticed there were no big jumps in dynamic or volume or different things like that. It sounds like the same project. It sounds like the same artist, maybe same engineer, kind of blended all this together, and it sounds very uniform and very cohesive. Well, that's a big part of the mastering engineer's job. He takes all those individual songs and tracks and blends them all into one big project. So again, we're zooming out even further. Every time we take another step in this project process, we're zooming out a little bit further and kind of blending it further and further and further. Another thing that the mastering engineer is in charge of is bringing tracks up to commercial volume or loudness standards. So if you've ever mixed your own project and then just thrown it up on a streaming service, you've probably noticed that that song is really quiet relative to a lot of the other songs on there. And that's because it most likely didn't go through a good mastering process. A big part of the mastering process is bringing up the loudness to match commercial standards. Every platform has loudness standards that they impose in order to get everybody kind of on the same loudness level. And that's a big part of the mastering engineer's job, to get those tracks up to that loudness level so it can compete on the radio or another streaming platform. So that's kind of what mastering is, kind of start to finish. We've zoomed out a little bit further and we're working with things as a whole instead of the individual pieces. So as you can see, mastering is a huge part of the production process that goes unnoticed by most people. Most people really have no idea that it gets into that much detail. Many think that you can just kind of record individual tracks and then just throw the raw tracks on the internet and it'll work out fine. And the reality is there's way more to this process, and hopefully kind of breaking this down a little bit helps you see and come to appreciate what goes into the audio production process as a whole. So hopefully that made sense to you. Hopefully that breakdown was helpful for you. If you're new to this channel and you're new to mixing audio, I have a free gift for you on my website called the 7-Step Mix. And in this guide, it'll walk you through the 7 steps that I take in every single mix. It'll give you a great systematic process for your mixes to get you good, consistent, positive results. So if that sounds like it would be helpful for you, you can go download it completely for free to you on my website, themixingprocess.com. And as always, if you have any questions for me about audio, or maybe a project or a problem that you're working on and having trouble with, feel free to type it out in the comments below. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you. Or if you want to, you can actually go directly to my website and contact me directly from there. So until I hear from you, go be great at what you do. Thanks for watching. Call me if you need help.